Everyone who is just joining us in room 3. So yeah, just to remind you, you're here to see Walter and Martin, the role of EAP practitioner in a university-wide project to address contract cheating. Okay, it's gone 25 past, so I think we will get started. So yes, we have Walter, Nowlan and Martin. Is it Seviour, Martin?
Yeah, Eddie, Seviour.
Thank you. And yeah, really glad to have you both speaking. So I've seen you both talk in recent years on this area. I think one of them was at a recent Bali conference just before the pandemic, and it was fascinating. So really glad that you're here, and a great way to end the parallel session. I think it really complements some of the sessions that we've had throughout the day. So before I forget, any questions, please pop them in the chat to the audience, but of course we can pick those up at the end, and you can also just raise your hand and unmute yourself at the end. Martin and Walter, if necessary, I'll give you a verbal cue for when you're about 2 minutes from the end, but if it looks like you're wrapping up, then I won't do. But without further ado, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks very much, Eddie. Thanks very much for organising this event. And quick word of intro about myself. Yeah, so I'm Martin Seviour, and I'm Principal Lecturer in EAP here at Nottingham-Trent, and I oversee our various EAP programmes. I'll let Walter say a word about himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Walter Nowlan. I'm the Senior Lecturer in EFL and TESOL at Nottingham-Trent University, and I'm also the course leader for our pre-sessional course.
Thanks, Walter. So, bit nervous about ending on a theme of contract cheating. I just want to reassure you that we do have a very positive angle on our presentation, particularly on a Friday afternoon. Anything with cheating in the title sort of implies that we're going to take a sort of negative approach. But I think you'll see that we do have a positive angle on this. So shall we kick off, Walter, with the first slide? Yeah, so here's the good news. As I'm sure all of you know, the law to outlaw contract cheating has now become a reality. At last, as you can see in that first headline, it's taken a long time, but finally it's found its way into Parliament, through Parliament, into the House of Lords, and thanks to a lot of lobbying, including from the EAP community and others, and some champions within Parliament, it's finally going to become law, and so it will become against the law for the various contract cheating companies to sell their services in England. Please note, in England. If you look at that second headline, unfortunately, apologies if you're listening in from Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, it might take a little longer in the devolved places, but it is going to happen. So this is all good news. If you look at that final headline there, another piece of good news from Australia, again quite recent news, that they've successfully, for the first time, they've managed to prosecute, or not prosecute, they've managed to use the law, which they've had for a long time, to prevent various companies from giving any space to these contract cheating companies. So that's the very first time they've managed to use the law that they've had, as I say, for a while. So this is a nice positive note to start on. It will become illegal for these companies to operate in England and hopefully across the UK. And of course, that's going to give us a lot more strength to our argument with students that this in general is not a good idea. Next slide, Walter. And I just wanted to remind you that SA Mills contract cheating companies don't only exist online. One reason why I first got into looking at this whole area was that I had the misfortune of having to drive past this particular establishment on my way to work and on my way back from work. This is the UK HQ for UK essays, which I'm sure you all know. It's one of our premier, is that the right word, most notorious essay mills. and it's got its headquarters in Arnold, which is a quiet little suburb of Nottingham, a few hundred meters from my house and only a mile or so from Walter's house. So, you know, they're not just these companies that exist in the dark corners of the internet. They do have a physical presence. I'm very much hoping that when it becomes illegal, that this particular building will find new occupiers. However, next slide, Walter. However, we shouldn't kid ourselves that legislation against these companies is going to do the trick completely. It's going to disrupt contract cheating. It's going to make the companies that provide it rethink their business model. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think for one moment that it's going to disappear. For one thing, just look at the scale of it. The QAA very recently came up with the figure of 932 contract cheating websites that were operating in the UK. So, you know, nearly 1,000. The sheer scale of the operation is mind-boggling. You know, whether or not the law can tackle all 1,000 of those, you know, very quickly is quite doubtful. The other thing to note is that this is a massively lucrative industry for those involved in it. Lancaster back in 2016 estimated it was worth something between 100 and 200 million pounds a year, probably a lot more by now. So for obvious reasons, they're not going to give up easily, and they'll use their wealth, I suspect, to find new ways to, you know, attract certain students into their clutches. And in terms of how many students are engaging with them, Newton back in 2018 reckoned it was around 1% of students. Curtis Sinclair, a little earlier than that, noted that a lot of offenders are likely to reoffend. I personally think that 1% now is considerably higher than that. And there's also evidence, including from Hill et al. In this year, that the COVID situation has actually increased the number of students that are engaging the services of these contract cheating companies. Obviously, students were spending a lot more time online. Many of them were more vulnerable and stressed and worried and therefore susceptible. So there is a certain amount of evidence to show that that it has become more prevalent over recent years. So clearly, for all these reasons, we can't just rely on the law. What we need to do is to better understand why it's happening, and then to address the causes and motivations behind the behavior that leads students to engage the services of these contract cheating companies. Next, Walter. So, to get to the theme of our talk today, to help us do this, Walter and I joined up with some other colleagues across the university, and we put in an application for a sabbatical. It was actually called a Tiger Team Sabbatical. So we, together with a range of colleagues, we wrote up an application, and we were successful, fortunately. And so we were given some time within our workload. We were bought out for a certain number of hours to devote to this. And the team was made up of a range of people you can see there. There were people like myself and Walter, the EAP practitioners, but there were academics from other fields as well, including psychology, which proved to be particularly useful. We had a quality manager, someone that's, you know, very much involved in the quality assurance side of the university. We had 2 or 3 people, and that does include myself and Walter, that were active panel members on academic irregularity panels. We had a students' union representative, and we had 1 or 2 representatives from the library, who obviously clearly play a big role in the whole academic integrity thing. Okay, and so here's just a little snapshot of how the sabbatical sort of panned out. We had 3 stages. We realized very early on that we needed to devote quite a lot of time to really getting to grips with the literature and the documentation and the whole a review of the whole situation as it stood. So there's an awful lot to read over recent years. The depth of the literature, it's amazing how it's developed. So we wanted to give ourselves an awful lot of time to really get to grips with that before we started to think about what could our most useful outputs be. And so you can see there in stage 2 some of our key outputs. We're involving the student union in developing their own materials that they'll use directly to support students in different ways. The library, they already have a range of materials focusing on particularly around plagiarism, but because they were involved in the Sabbatical team, they're going to be developing some new things around contract cheating. Myself and Walter, and you're going to see some examples of these in a moment, we sat down and thought about, well, what kind of things can we develop that could be used by other teaching staff to teach students about strategies for becoming more aware of contract cheating and for countering it, if you like. And so we've been developing some materials that could be used by staff in different scenarios, in group tutorials or woven into classes they're given within their subject area, but also could be used by different sorts of mentors, including what we here call CERT mentors. These are students who are trained to support other students, and CERT there stands for Collaborative Engagement and Retention Team. So they're working hard with students, particularly students who are feeling a little unsure about their progress, etc. So the materials weren't just intended for teaching staff, they were also intended for student mentors. And finally, we wanted to produce materials that would help guide the staff who are involved either in preparing academic irregularity panels, particularly those that involve cases of contract cheating, either the members of staff who are preparing those or who are invited to take part in those. So a range of materials, and Walter's going to give you a little glimpse at the ones that we worked on in a moment. And then of course we get to stage 3, which we've just embarked on today, which is disseminating our findings. Okay, so at that point I'm going to hand over to Walter. He's going to give you a bit more of a detailed look at stage 1 and some of our outputs in stage 2. Thanks, Walter.
Thanks, Martin. I just want to highlight before we go to the next slide that even though we're at the dissemination stage, we're also still at stage 2 at the outputs, because we haven't piloted the materials just yet. So a little bit of a disclaimer there before we move on. Okay, so let's think about the literature review. So we had quite a wide scope for the parameters of our literature review. We wanted to get an overview of the situation as it stood at the moment. So we looked at definitions, prevalence that Martin mentioned as well, the different types of contract cheating as well, and the kind of techniques that these that contract cheating sites in particular use to get their clients. Yeah. We were also interested in those predictive variables, so things like demographics, the behavior of students, the theories that underpinned those variables as well. And we were really interested in information for staff, so we were looking out particularly for prevention and deterrence strategies, including assessment design. So really nice link to Heather McLean's excellent session this morning about using multi-part assessment as a way of factoring out cheating. Really great to see that mentioned as well earlier in the day, so fabulous. Also information for staff about how to detect it and how to take part in academic integrity panels. So we've highlighted the first 3 because those related more to the set of materials that Martin and I have been working on. So if we think about the overview, we've taken Lancaster and Clark's definition here. So I'll give you just a moment to have a look at it. And we chose that one because it was broad enough to cover lots of different contract cheating behaviour, because as Audrey and I've have said, have mentioned, you know, that there's a kind of informal outsourcing, that where money doesn't change hands, you know, if it's family or friends and those networks doing that, then, you know, the Lancaster and Clark definition covers that. And they've made a really interesting point as well about choosing the term carefully in any kind of guidance to students, because they might not make that link between, you know, contract cheating and informal help from your friendship or your family network. Lancaster, the big daddy of all of this, really, he's listed the main types of contract cheating, a little out of date now, but still useful, I feel. And we can see that the essay writing services and the family and friendship network and and using other students as well, still pretty high up there. But interesting to note the final one on here, this reversed classified. So this is websites like Fiverr, where students put out their, you know, their bids and saying, here, I need some help. And Brett et al. Also mentioned this kind of sharing behaviours. So there are websites available now where students can sell their essays and sell their notes. So who's doing this? Well, you know, the research has shown that it's, you know, younger students, interestingly males, but perhaps for our reasons, it's second language users, sadly. And Walker and Townley, you know, sensibly suggest that this could be due to a lack of familiarity with UK genres and assessment types. That's it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And also they're likely to outsource from other students and essay mills if they're risk averse. They don't really have this friendship network on which they can draw, so they can't use their family and friendships here. Okay, and that's the reason perhaps why they kind of turn more to essay mills. So there are lots of motivations. So this is from Kralikova et al. Just to mention, this is based in the Czech context, but there's some really interesting themes here that's brought out. So we've got ability, but also these kind of effective motivations, and we'll come to that a little bit later. That's linked to the instrumental nature of getting help, and also some things where the university perhaps can provide more help. And I'm really interested in that final one, wanting a higher grade. You know, so I think in the previous session, one of the participants mentioned this kind of commodification of HE and how you know, it's become a product, you know, and so I think that could be a motivation too. This was really interesting research done by Amigud and Lancaster, and they were looking at the reasons given by students in their solicitations for contracted work on sites like Fiverr, and they found that, you know, a lot of the discourse here is about finding the task too difficult, some kind of attitude gap as well. So, you know, the task's too difficult for them, they can't understand the material. Also self-discipline as well, and I was really interested in that, not being able to start the work on their own. You know, they need to work collaboratively to get started, and once they're started, they're fine. Yeah, no surprises to see personal issues on there as well, and competing objectives, especially if the students are working or they've got family commitments. And we looked at it about, so we thought about the motivations, and we thought about how can we target them, and, you know, who do we need to target. And there's some really interesting research by Rigby et al, and they using this idea of favorable self-concept. Let me explain that to you. So they identified 3 types of students. So they've got the students on the right hand side who, you know, bone idle perhaps, but they are, you know, they will cheat if there's a reward to be had. Yeah, okay. So you know, so they will cheat. They say, right, why should I do the work? I'm going to pay someone to do it. We also have students on the right-hand side, completely ethical, who would be mortified, yeah, and they would not cheat. Even if there's rewards to be had, they wouldn't do it because it doesn't sit right with them. And then you've got this interesting grey area, you know, this group in the middle who they call partially dishonest. So they will cheat, but only if the rewards of that cheating behavior outweigh the costs and also the risks of detection. Yeah. And also really importantly, that they maintain that self-perception of like, I'm doing the right thing here. Yeah. Okay. And they will look for justifications, you know, like, oh, but you know, the deadline's too soon, no one could do that, or I don't get any support from the university, or the teaching's really bad. Yeah. So if we look at these groups again, the ones on the left hand side, you know, no amount of intervention, you know, teaching will do anything about that. Maybe what we need to do here is to improve the detection, to remove those gains. Yeah. Okay. To remove those rewards that the student perceives. Yeah. For the partially dishonest, we need to start thinking perhaps about changing that perception of risk and reward. Yeah. So that it's making offending less appealing and less logical for them. And we need to challenge those false justifications for that they're using to say, no, I'm doing the right thing here. Yeah. And interestingly, also those really ethical students, we can enroll to be advocates of this culture of integrity that I'm going to talk about in just a few seconds. So there are loads of prevention strategies there. So the QAA, really great document with loads of advice in there saying, like, we need to involve the students, not about finger wagging here. And, you know, it's not just about front loading and saying, oh, I've done my contract cheating session with them, they know that, but it's sort of making sure that the message is done throughout the course. And again, I think Heather McLeod mentioned that in her excellent session this morning as well. A really interesting idea of developing a culture of integrity, where the focus is not on the grade. So it's not in that instrumental, I want my 2-1. It's about focusing on, you know, on learning and you know, how developing the skills so that you get that 2-1. Brett Agatal have a really interesting idea about helping students to navigate those grey areas of that sharing economy. So, you know, like someone asks you for your notes, yeah, because they're just using them, or they just want to see an exemplar of an essay, you know. So what do students do in that situation, and who owns it? Yeah. And the idea also that we don't spend all our resources trying to persuade the person who's going to cheat anyway. Yeah, it's much better for us to try and develop those good practices in the majority and encourage honesty in them. Yeah. Okay. And we also need to think about, you know, the underlying motivation of students. Yeah. And address that with the students, involving the students in that discussion. So there are some online games that already exist. You know, there's some kind of gaming is a big theme here, but a lot of them seem a little outdated now, dealing more with the surface level issues and not really with academic integrity. The European Network of Academic Integrity are developing their own materials. Watch this space, they're going to be out soon, I'd imagine. And White has really interesting ideas about using competitive quiz platforms. Those are great, but they're not really, you know, and useful to integrate within this, but perhaps not the best tool for developing a rich discussion of those grey ethical areas. Yeah. And yeah, need to be vehicles for conversations. Yeah. So again, and the socialization process. So again, involving the student in those discussions, essentially. So let's turn to the output. So we had
2 minutes or so, Mark.
Okay, thanks ever so much. So we're thinking about these three different sections here. So we've got myth busting to challenge false justifications. We also have scenarios to elicit those suitable behaviors from students and allow them to explore the ethics of those scenarios. And then we ask them to develop a culture of integrity by forming their own guidelines. Yeah, so we considered, you know, wanted the materials to be student-centered but accessible to all kinds of students, and really easy for the subject lecturer, the personal tutor, the cert mentor to deliver. So we've kept them as Word documents that you know, each individual person who's delivering that training can amend it themselves and put it into different formats if they wished. So the myth busting here, students were discussing some different statements and they compared that against a guide to think about, you know, and then at the end to present back and think about how their ideas met the ideas in the guide. We also had some scenarios, as I mentioned. And again, students in groups thinking about that, how they would respond and why, and then feeding back to the group. No, not rocket science there. And then the group guidelines. Yeah, so what students would do, what they'd think about when they encounter contract cheating, and what they would do to what actions they would take based on those considerations. So I'm going to hand over to Martin. Sorry, Martin, for the last minute.
No. Can I pinch another minute, Eddie?
Of course, go on. Yeah.
Yeah. So very briefly, I just put together here a very quick list of how I think we as EAP practitioners can really play a key role in combating this contract cheating and sort of skilling students to be able to avoid it. So the first thing on the list there is I think that we can get directly involved with our universities in advising them on academic irregularity policy, including contract cheating policy and procedures, because I found from various discussions that they don't usually know as much as we do, and they're quite open to listening to our views on that. Secondly, I've said that I think we can help subject staff integrate more academic literacy things within their own teaching. Not everyone's open to that, but I found a fair number of colleagues over the years that really welcome sort of a bit of advice on how they can make their sessions on using sources, etc., more useful, more dynamic, etc. So there are colleagues out there that are really willing to listen to us. Thirdly, trying to embed ourselves in subject teams so that we're not that bolt-on thing, but we're actually a part of a subject team, and therefore more able to influence maybe the content of a particular module and build in things such as Walter's been just showing you. We can share our knowledge and resources in different ways, including conferences like this. We could organise academic integrity days. A number of universities I know have done that. We can, you know, ask to become involved in academic irregularity panels just to make sure that our expertise is used. And I think Walter and I have done this now for several years, and I think there are many cases where we've been able to sort of ensure that the outcomes are positive for the student. So although the student may have been found guilty, if that's the right word, we've been able to steer that student towards the right kind of advice so it doesn't happen again. And I think we need to lobby for an institution-wide approach. You know, it's no good us just beavering away in our little area. We need to really ask our universities to take this on as a serious thing. And one first step for that would be to ask them to sign the QAA Charter on academic integrity. You can see the link there. I'm ashamed to say I checked it not long ago, and Nottingham Trent hasn't signed it yet. So as you can see, Walter and I still have a lot of work to do. But hopefully the outcomes of our sabbatical will help with that argument. If you want to check out whether your university has signed it, there's a very helpful alphabetical list, and you can see whether your leadership have actually signed it. So yeah, I'll leave it there, just so there's a minute or two for questions. But thanks very much for listening. Walter's chosen some selected areas of our literature review, papers that he's found particularly useful, I think, there. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Thank you very much, Walter. And yeah,